Hello? Okay. Thank you. So I'd like to welcome all of you tonight to Harvard Hall. And this is the same place where we had the 10th anniversary of the Chinese Cultural Organization. Just, as I said, 5 years ago, it was our 10th anniversary. But I'm very pleased that the Harvard Club put up a Christmas tree for us this time. It's a great honor and a great, beautiful place. And in fact, I'd like to thank the general manager, Herbert Geisling, and the head of the committee that put this thing together, Alex Baldioli, for all of their good help and their good work. It was a gorgeous place, and we're so happy to be back here again. So just look around and just say, wow, it's nice to be here, and introduce yourselves to your neighbors and say, welcome. Now, this is a very historic occasion for several reasons. One of them is, perhaps the most important one is that China is celebrating the 40th anniversary of coming out, the reforms, the opening up of China. And this is an incredible thing that's happened. More than 600 million people have been taken out of poverty into the economy. China has gained the second largest economy in the world. It's been an amazing process. And the one thing to reflect on this is it has been a peaceful process and an economically successful process for all the countries involved.
And tonight, we are extremely fortunately and honored to have Mr. Greenberg, our honorary chairman, join us. Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Thank you. When we started the foundation in 2003, we have a little idea of how the future will lead us to. Over the last 15 years, we have successfully provided a high-quality cultural and educational program at many prestigious global gatherings and in partnership with many public and private corporations and institutions throughout the world. Since a picture is worth a thousand words, I would like to present some highlights of our history and introduce our honorary chairman and founding trustees. We are very grateful to have Mr. Greenberg as our honorary chairman. He just been awarded as the highest honor to foreign international business leader in recognition of Mr. Greenberg's significant contribution to China's 40 years of economic reform with the China Reform Friendship Medal. Congratulations, Mr. Greenberg. We are so proud of you. T.C. Chu. Well, TC, we call him TC. Unfortunately, he won't be with us tonight, but he was the former president of the Star Foundation. Thanks TC, the Chinese Cultural Foundation was able to start our journey. And John Allen, he also is the chairman of the Great China Corporation with more than 30 years of international investment experience, especially in China. And this is me, yes. I'm very proud to be part of the Chinese Cultural Foundation. From the very beginning, we fortunately to have the strong support from David Rockefeller, Sir James Wolfenson, and the former mayor of Bloomberg, Mayor Mike Bloomberg. Also, thanks many of you who are here with us tonight. This is Sir James Wolfenson, former president of the World Bank, at our 10th anniversary, right here at the Harvard Hall. The highlight of the event was the exhibition of the rare birds of China, which is commissioned by Sir James. It represents the importance of protecting endangered species in China and around the world. And this is Michael Bloomberg, our former mayor. In his congratulatory letter at our 10th anniversary, he thanks our Chinese Cultural Foundation for sharing his mission to maintain New York City as a cultural capital of the world. And this is David Rockefeller, who provided strong support to us to have the first ever living Chinese artist Chinese art exhibition at the Palace of Versailles for the World Cultural Summit, where Chinese ambassador to France, the president of the Palace of Versailles, the OSTA, and 500 international representatives participated. In 2003, we have a major UN exhibition, which have more than 300 cultural, diplomatic, and business leaders attended, including Ambassador Chen Jie and the Secretary General of the United Nations. Also in 2003, we support the celebrated Chinese artist Wu Xing's art exhibition at the Asian Society Museum. As you can see, Ambassador Platt hosted the opening reception. Thank you, Ambassador Platt. You hasn't changed. You still look the same. Thank you. In 2004, we hosted the Rare Birds of China Gala dinner at the Great Hall of the People for the World Economic Forum China Business Summit in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. We also led a special panel discussion at the World Economic Forum on the importance of art and culture in China's economic development. In 2006, we held the newly founded China General Chamber of Commerce USA to lead a delegation at the China-US Business Forum at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. And this is Mr. Chen Si-wei, Vice Chairman of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, with Mr. John Allen and our CCS delegation. Also in 2006, we joined institutional investor co-organized the third annual China Investment Forum at the Metropolitan Club here in New York. This event was co-sponsored by Bank of China and Merrill Lynch. In 2009, we were honored with the Yuan Award at the first China Urban Economic Development and International Cooperation Forum in Beijing. In 2010, the Year of the Tiger, we celebrated the Chinese New Year at the Citibank and at the Bank of China. In 2013, we co-sponsored a major Chinese art exhibition at the National Arts Club. The special feature was the giant screen displayed in Times Square, which was provided by our sponsor, V Media. Thank you, James Bond. And here is a photo of our honorary chairman, Mr. Greenberg, holding his beloved dog, Snowball, on the giant screen in Times Square. Come closer. And in 2014, the Chinese Cultural Foundation, in partnership with the Carnegie Hall, to support the National Youth Orchestra USA for their first China tour. There are 120 young musicians from all of America traveling to seven major Chinese cities during the summer of 2015. We helped to raise more than $1 million. In 2017, we co-sponsored the Black and White Panda Ball at the New York historic Moda Hotel. The event had to attract 500 New York's most prominent business and political leaders. At the same year, at the Chinese Cultural Foundation, welcomed 300 distinguished guests to our Gala at the Yale Club to announce the Marie R. Greenberg Global Leadership Award. It's a major initiative of the Chinese Cultural Foundation that recognizes those individuals and organizations whose achievements reflect Mr. Greenberg's ideals and global vision. A highlight of the event was a conversation with Mr. Greenberg. Yale University President Peter Salovey and the Chinese Ambassador Zhang Qiyue on the importance of culture and education in U.S.-China relations. We are now look forward to our exciting future. The best is yet to come. Please join me to watch China Daily's latest production entitled Mr. Greenberg, Beliefs in China's Future.
Many insurance companies, they're job creating, they're learning more also, and they're also investing overseas. So we've done great. Several $100 million, and we're proud of that. And then you look at China today is like going to a country that I've never visited before. I mean, take Shanghai as an example. Shanghai today is the most modern city I visited. Compared to New York, it's much more advanced in many areas. China has a more diversified economy. It's not relying on one thing or two things, but the diversification gives it more stability and it creates more jobs in China. I think that they're on the right track. China's opening up policy will benefit everybody, China and the rest of the world. And opening up was a continuous process, but there's more to go. There's no question about it. I think that basically the relationship could be better, but it's not bad. We both have a lot to give to each other, but it can't be one-sided. And China's investing overseas also. China wants to invest in, say, in different industries in the United States. The United States doesn't want to invest in China. That's fine. I certainly believe that China will develop. So I was willing to pay the price of time.
Thank you very much, Hank. And now I'd also like to welcome the Deputy Consul General and their representatives, the new Ambassador Wang to New York. Ambassador Wang, unfortunately, is in Washington. He was going to be here, but his deputy, the Deputy Consul General, Mr. Zhao, is here, and I'd like him to come to the stage and say a few words for us, please.
Distinguished guests, when I stand in front of you, VIPs, I'm really a real little potato. You witnessed and participated in the 40 plus years of China-US relations. So now I feel humble, but also encouraged to say something regarding the most important US-China relations, especially in such a moment when people in both countries, China and the US, feel frustrated. I was born in 1972 when President Nixon paid a surprising but historic visit to Beijing. From the documentary of his visit, I got to know he had been to my hometown, beautiful Hangzhou. Now the city is famous for Jack Ma, not for its scenic beauty. I understand in early 1970s, the scenic beauty of Hangzhou represents the limited resources China can offer to show its hospitality. By doing so, China expressed its willingness to make friends with the United States, even in such a difficult time. 100 years before Nixon's visit, in 1872, the city of Hartford, Connecticut, also another very important city in our consular area, received 30 very young Chinese kids, aged from 9 through 15, They were supposed to have 15 years of education that learned from the US the most advanced technology to save the collapsing Qing dynasty. Unfortunately, those young kids were summoned back to China 9 years later before entering universities. Part of the reason was that in 1880s, anti-China immigration mood in America became stronger and finally resulted in the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was adopted in 1882. Still touching me was that in that difficult time, someone like Madame Northrop, host of one Chinese young student, Zhan Tianyou, encouraged Zhan to study hard to serve his country. Zhan finally graduated from Yale and became the first railway engineer. Gene Gardner, another average American gentleman in Springfield, Massachusetts, treated Tang Shaoyi, another young Chinese kid, very well. And the latter finally became the first premier of China in 1912. I cannot finish taking examples like this US-China friendship, especially those done by ordinary people. Those pure friendships always encouraged me to do something meaningful. I joined China's Foreign Service 23 years ago, and it began with my job connected to America 14 years ago. Most of my time was to bridge China and the United States together. I have participated in all presidential visits by two sides since 2006. Sunnyland meeting, Mar-a-Lago dinner are all my good memories. However, what most struck me are those days and years I met American ordinary people. When I served as a diplomat in Texas and now in New York, I traveled to Louisiana to pay tribute to Clea Chenault's family, who was a hero named Flying Tiger. I traveled to Alabama. I told the local people that there was a couple who came from New Orleans and Mobile, Alabama, and spent 50 years in China, helping Chinese build the Yanqing University and the Zhejiang University, where I entered to study, whose names are John Layton Stewart and Aileen Rod. Please remember them. John could speak fluent Hangzhou dialect much better than I can do. Later on, I'm here in New York. I traveled in the consular areas. I traveled to Hartford, Connecticut, and then got to know those touching stories I just told you. Ladies and gentlemen, the ties between China and the United States cannot come back to 1880s. When we commemorate the 40th anniversary of China-US relations, what can we do now? 1.5 centuries after Zhan Tianyou and his pals arrived in America, China now, with the hard work of generations of Chinese people, and with the generous help by generations of American people, stands as a tall, strong young man. Its people now are much better fed, better dressed, better educated, even though sometimes not better mannered as you expected. However, a prosperous China is actually what American people wished for decades, if not centuries. Why do China and the United States now view each other so hostilely? Some argue China didn't behave well enough to act as a real adult or as an honest player in level field by cheating or forcing others. Some argue that China will never become part of us because they don't believe in our faith. On the other hand, in China, some argue that America is a bullying gangster, suppressing weak countries. Some argue that America always behaves selfishly, adopt what's good for them and abandon it tomorrow when it turns negative to them. I ask myself, why two nice and innocent guys cannot get along with each other? I think those two lack the ability to put themselves in the other's shoes. China and the United States know they are different from each other, but don't know why they have those differences and how to overcome those differences. They all ask the other to understand themselves instead of trying to be the other and introspect themselves. We need a benign and a positive interaction. But how? One day, my son, who studies at Reed College in Portland, told me that I was inspired by a phrase by Steve Jobs: stay hungry and stay foolish. Yeah, stay hungry and stay foolish. Stay hungry means both China and the United States need to be dissatisfied with the achievements they proudly made. Undoubtedly, the United States is the superpower and prevails in economy, science, technology, military, and culture. But that's not the end of history. The US still bears responsibility to lead the human to pursue a better future. The United States succeeded by being diverse, inclusive, innovative, not by blocking others or creating hatred. China needs to be humble as a learner and a follower. Of course, China is worth being proud of its success by hard work and worth being respected as an equal player. But 40 years of success, reform and opening up is just a small step in its long march to its rejuvenation. It's not the time for China to be arrogant. Actually, never. What's more important for both countries is that do not forget focusing energy on pursuing common goals hungrily. Stay foolish means both China and the United States need to be always ready to challenge their established knowledge. Many misunderstanding and mistrust are based on entrenched belief and judgment. These two successful countries are too successful to even think of any mistakes they could make. Sometimes self-confidence is useful, but not always helps. That's why I was told that China and the United States are actually the only two countries who are indulged in exceptionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, humans are born equal. There isn't any exceptions. So are countries. Let China and the United States keep humble, and finally they will find they are friends to each other, and will make wise and correct judgment. Only by pursuing common goals hungrily and assuming themselves as foolish can they keep competitive and successful forever. Let us do something helpful to this end, and cultural exchange is one of what we can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Consul Joe. It's very clear that they're two nice kids who should like each other. And I like the saying that came from many good philosophers: always put yourself in the other fellow's shoes. But it gets back to the purpose of the Chinese Cultural Foundation.
To me, it's the most important relationship in the world today. And I think the relationship, like all relationships, have ups and downs. I'm not concerned personally that we won't solve the problems. I think we will. I think it's in the interest of both countries. We all know that, and I believe that will be solved. China today is the second largest economy in the world, soon to be the first in the world. 1,400,000,000 people against our 300 million. The learning curve in China is very rapid. I think anybody who's been to China should recognize how far they've come in a very short period of time. I first went to China in 1975, and every year since, the change has been miraculous. I don't think it's happened any place in the world, anything like that. And so, to not believe that China will not be the first, the largest economy in the world, you have to believe in something else. But I think the relationship will be on a good track. Anybody who's been to China wants that to happen. The number of students, Chinese students coming to the United States is many, many. We support a program in Yale, for example, with many Chinese students. And I serve on the advisory board of Tsinghua University, a great school. In fact, one of my granddaughters will be going there in another year. And so the relationship is, I think, bound to be better. And I'm doing my part to try and help. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that introduction, and my warm gratitude to the Chinese Cultural Foundation for this award at a particularly important time to promote mutual understanding between our countries, as our previous speakers have already alerted us to. Let me say a word about Hank Greenberg, an old friend. I was searching for a particular word to sum up Hank. It's not easy. I came up with relentless. He is relentless in promoting good works like this foundation, many other charities and non-governmental organizations. He is relentless in promoting U.S.-Chinese relations, for which he's being correctly recognized. He is relentless in advancing, and I might say defending, his business and legal positions in many arenas. He's also relentless in trying to perfect his backhand and his second serve. And finally, he is relentless in the pursuit of marital bliss. I thought Betty and I were doing quite well with our 55 years, but Hank, you're still 13 years ahead of us. I don't know how I'm going to catch up. Corinne and Hank are a good example for everyone. I would like to dedicate this award, and she's going to hate me for this, to my wife, Betty, who in her own right has done so much to promote understanding between our two countries across the Pacific. I'm risking divorce by doing this, but through her best-selling books and as co-ambassador in China and winning the government's highest award for promoting cultural relations, I'm indebted to her not only for that, but for steering and supporting me in my career. Finally, I'm delighted to be... Yes. I'll never live that one down. Finally, I'm delighted to be joined by my fellow awardees, Nick Platt, who's an old friend and has done so much, Carla Hills, who couldn't be here, but Steve Orleans, in his own right, has done so much personally and through the National Committee to promote the same goals as we share this evening. Now, when you hear this roster of all these people talking and the awardees, you're assuming you're in the presence of China experts. And I'm afraid to tell you that we're here under false pretenses. There is no such thing as a China expert, given the unpredictability, the contradictions, the fast movement of the landscape in China. Indeed, I consider a China expert an oxymoron, or just a plain moron. And I can prove this by my own experience. Now, I'll make the case why I'm an expert, and I'll make the case why I'm not an expert, based on personal experience. The case in favor of my knowing something about China has to do with Henry Kissinger's secret trip in 1971. Now, I claim to be, and I apologize, some of my friends have heard this story, the first American official to enter China since 1949, when the communists took over, until this trip in 1971. Now, some of you think that was Nixon, most of you think that was Kissinger, but I was there before Henry Kissinger. We were flying secretly from Pakistan on a Pakistani plane to Beijing. Henry and I were in the back of the plane, but as we neared the Chinese border, I went to the front of the plane, so as we went into China, I was ahead of Henry. Now, the counter-argument, proving that I don't know anything about China, is a true story that my wife and I experienced when we were in Beijing in the late 1980s. We went out to a Beijing temple, just outside of Beijing, and the head monk came up, and his eyes lit up when he saw that I was the American envoy. My wife was a best-selling author. So he said, "Would you do a great honor for this temple? Would you write something in English to instruct and guide our future visitors?" Now Betty and I were really quite thrilled by this. He went off for a while, and Betty, because this is an honor, frankly, that is reserved for poets and emperors and great scholars, and so Betty was composing poetic couplets. I was composing Kissingerian maxims. The monk came back with 2 ornate tablets, and he said, "Now to guide and instruct our future visitors, would you write in English on this tablet the word ladies, and on this tablet the word gentlemen?" So that sort of humbled us about how much we knew about China. But on a more serious note, I do think we are at the most severe junction, a tipping point in U.S.-China relations, the most fraught with danger since the opening in the 1970s. We've had crises before. It's a sweet and sour relationship, but they're usually over one issue: Taiwan, colliding airplanes, bombing of an embassy, and even the Tiananmen Square incident, massacre if you will, which caused such tension, came at a time when China was relatively weak, where we had very little intersection with China across many sectors. But today we have a systemic challenge, as already been noted, across many fields. The foundation is the historic phenomenon of a rising power versus an established power, which is bound to create tensions and adjustment. I personally feel that this inherent problem has been exacerbated by both sides. Being an American, I think most of the guilt is on the Chinese side, but certainly both of us are making mistakes. I agree with Hank that I think we will survive it. We are in the midst of a strategic competition. From the U.S. standpoint, our China policy has to begin at home. The Deputy Consul General mentioned our diversity and other strengths. We've got to draw on those strengths. We've got to make our democracy work. We've got to bring Americans together. We've got to invest in our future so we can be competitive. And then we've got to work with allies and friends in dealing with China. So that's the framework, the context for a successful relationship. But beyond that, we and the Chinese have got to come to some strategic understandings, because right now the Chinese feel that we're out to contain them, we feel that China's out to take over Asia and then the world. So we've got to chart a course mutually, and let me give just a few examples in concluding my remarks of the kind of issues we're going to have to grapple with. America has got to not only recognize but welcome, and these steps by both sides have to be in deed, not just in word, that China is a great power, that it deserves a major say in world governance, including changing some rules of mutual consent, At the same time, it's not acceptable if China seeks to undermine the norms and the laws of world governance which have made it prosper in the first place. Similarly, in the Asia-Pacific region, there's room for both of us. We have to recognize that China obviously has a major role to play in that region. China has got to recognize that it cannot and should not try to drive us out of the region. Maritime issues. China has clear security concerns. They should be respected, but China cannot break international law and militarize occupied countries, islands, contrary to pledges made by our previous president. Cyber espionage, we all do it. Cyber theft is something different, and China pledged not to do that, and it looks like they're reneging on that. Terrorism, of course, we all have a right to fight terrorism, but not in the way that's being practiced in Xinjiang. Economic innovation. China deserves to develop its own indigenous efforts on advanced technology. It is not acceptable if they force or steal American technology. And finally, public diplomacy, something we should exercise on both sides of the Pacific, but it should be an even playing field. And we should distinguish between what is legitimate and what is illegitimate in our own society, and not succumb to anti-Chinese hysteria, but push back when something is coercive, covert, or corrupt. So these are a few examples of the kind of issues we're going to have to deal with. And this calls for more exchange, not less, more engagement, not less. And that is why I'm particularly pleased this evening to receive this award for this purpose by this organization.
Now, it's a great honor to receive this award, and I'm grateful to Elizabeth Wong for having this idea. I'm also grateful to Hank Greenberg, with whom I have shared the task of furthering U.S.-China relations over the past 3 decades. My work on the relationship between our countries began in 1972, first as a participant in President Nixon's visit, and then as an officer in our first liaison office in Beijing. President, like Lord, when we began our relationship, Chinese friends call me the fossil who talks. Whatever that means, at least I have a long view. My children, who you've already met, were with me in Beijing in 1973. Their Chinese names are Big Tiger, Dahu, Tiger number 2, Arhu, and Tiger number 3, Sanhu. And Sanhu still has that name because he's Nick Jr. and we have to call him something else. Much of my work since leaving the U.S. government occurred under the auspices of the Asia Society, chaired for years by Mr. Greenberg. It has placed me squarely in the middle of people-to-people relations between our countries. Over the years, these relations, once tiny and barely existent, have become so huge that they have assumed major strategic significance. Trade, investment, travel, sports, culture, science, and education have become regular agenda items in the strategic and economic dialogue between our governments. But while the governments set the tone
and the legal framework, the day-to-day management of these ties is for the most part in the hands of private individuals and organizations, particularly on the U.S. side. These private relations now constitute the largest part of the dealings between us and have developed a life of their own. At the beginning, communication between Washington and Beijing worked like a simple single-line tactical field telephone, with Dr. Kissinger cranking at one end and Zhou Enlai answering at the other. Now, it more resembles a huge fiber optic cable, millions of messages going in both directions, most of which the governments never see. Policy shifts on both sides now threaten our interdependence. Looming conflict clouds our trade. China says our tariffs are designed to stunt its growth and prevent it from assuming its rightful place as a major power. We accuse China of taking our technology and limiting our companies' access to its economy. National security officials on both sides regard each other as adversaries. I am frequently asked whether this relationship, which has changed and moved the world for almost 50 years, can survive these pressures. I firmly believe that it can. Is conflict inevitable? I believe it is not. China is too big to contain, and our relationship is too complicated to decouple. We have spent decades together, both competing and cooperating, while dealing with serious crises along the way. We have no choice but to press ahead with the focus on practical solutions rather than ideological pronouncements. My field is cultural exchange, and in 2019 I will accompany the Philadelphia Orchestra on its next annual China tour. This time to participate in celebrations of the 40th anniversary of official relations between our countries. Back in 1973, Philadelphia was the first American orchestra to visit the PRC, and I was there to help them. At a time when growing tension and disagreement mark other aspects of the relationship, cooperation between partners, between long-term trusted partners, represents welcome continuity. You can rest assured that I will place all the knowledge, experience, and passion that I have left to making our relationship flourish in a world of rapid and constant change. Thank you.
我发现今天晚上人都说英文了，是不是我们应该用中文讲吧？我看中文很多，就是我也看外国人也多，所以我可能用英文。So I'll just speak in English tonight to make it quick, because I know I'm standing between you and dinner. Carla is sorry she couldn't be here, and I know she'd be happy to be here for several reasons. One is the honorees. As we've heard, there is more experience on China here, over a century of experience, way over a century of experience on China. As Win has told the story of him running to the front of the plane when they were on the secret trip from Pakistan to Beijing. He was there at the beginning.
and Nick Platt, who was part of the Consul General in Hong Kong in the 60s, and then was part of the liaison office. And they were really there at the inception of U.S.-China relations, and then Hank Greenberg, if you've heard so much about Hank. And I think you just need to remember one thing about Hank, which is no American business person has done more for constructive U.S.-China relations than Hank Greenberg. And Hank, we can never thank you enough for that. Carla, if you don't know Carla, you've missed a lot. It is one of the truly gracious, wonderful public servants that America has ever had. Not only was she Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, she was United States Trade Representative with a global view. What can I say? It sometimes is not exactly present these days. But she really has served the country and then has been chair of the National Committee for the last 17 years. So she really appreciates getting this award. The other reason she would be happy to be here is she, as we know, as Deputy Consul General Zhao said, we're in a difficult time in U.S.-China relations. It's really a troubled time. But one of the foundations of the relationship is the cultural exchanges that we have. That no matter how difficult it gets on the government-to-government level, that the cultural exchanges, Nick was saying, the people-to-people exchanges remain the ballast of the relationship. And you know what? That, in the end, is going to be what determines the future of U.S.-China relations. It's the people who are going to decide it. And what we all know is whether you're a mother in New York or a mother in Shanghai, your concerns are actually the same. And what the people do know is that in order to deal with the real crises confronting this world, not the ones that are often made up in Washington, but the real crises, the United States and China are going to need to cooperate. And that's the message that Carla would deliver tonight. So I thank you, Elizabeth and John, for the award on Carla's behalf, and I thank you all for coming tonight. 谢谢各位。
Before I let you all decide,
I'll sit on Hank's lap.
you can sit next to the council. If you could please, we'd like to have a photo opportunity, because it's rare that you get such incredible dignitaries on one stage at the same time. Was the chair over there?
I don't think so.
Okay.
My eyes are getting bad.
Well, here, Elizabeth, come on up here. Come on up there. So, and there's a chair for you. Elizabeth, would you like to sit down? Okay. Thank you all of our great honorees. As I say, this is a very historic moment because I don't think at any time there have been such people of prominence in U.S.-China relations as we have here.